Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema, exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. Crowley's short paper, Notes for an Astral Atlas, argues for the possibility of contact with non-human intelligences by way of the astral plane. It also urges the need for both an open mind and a persistent skepticism. We'll dip into this essay that reads like Magick's answer to our episode on Hume.
Hey, how's your Enochian experiment working out?
Well, that's what I feel kind of led me into joining the AA. I felt like it was an indication of that I had some unpolished corners that I needed to go back over.
Right.
And so that's pretty much what I'm doing with the AA at this point. So that was the biggest thing to come out of it. And I haven't really been doing my own personal Enochian work. I've been concentrating on the AA stuff, and I had been collaborating on some Enochian stuff with a couple of other people for Toronto Thelema, kind of behind the scenes. So yeah, the old pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of thing.
Sure. Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting. My AA student phase, I chose to do a lot of Enochian work, and I was also not told directly, because they don't tell you things directly, but it was like strongly indicated that I should stop. And that's ended up being why at least part of why I went back to school.
Yeah.
Because I think they were saying, like, not only are you always stressed out about money, but also if you want to do this properly, you need to buy some really nice things.
We like gold and jewels. Yeah, come on.
And so it was strongly intimated that before I proceed, I needed to get some more cash flow through, elevate my financial status a little bit, so that before I was taken seriously by entities that have no understanding of any of that stuff, apparently. So that was very confusing. But so it's weird that we were both told to stop for different reasons.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. I mean, it could just be one of those, like, I think I'd mentioned to somebody that, to me, I'd noticed some people seem to get certain indications from the Enochian angels that keep them busy or diverted, because it's almost like they're like, okay, we can tell that you're not really useful to us, so you go play in the corner here.
Sure.
And so there's a certain extent of like, oh, wait a second, if I'm a little bit more self-aware than I might want to be, does that mean that's what's being done with me? But
I remember our mutual friend, not the occult literary figure, our known friend, but a person who was actually a mutual friend of ours. And I don't know if his family wants his name mentioned in connection with all this stuff. He's dead now, so I feel weird about it, because he was so out in the open and wanting to be the center of every discussion about this stuff. But if he's passed, his hopes and dreams about that no longer matter. But the guy was saying that he had been a Satanist until he started trying to do Enochian magic, and that the angels wouldn't pay any attention to him at all until he started using Thelemic symbols in his communications with them. And so it seems to be, I mean, here's the thing. If you're looking for an initiatory experience, hopefully you want to change something about your approach. You know, it's like you don't want to, like I joked in a previous cast to have the vision of the throne and to have, you know, God say, you were right about everything.
Yeah.
And so
come up here, jump on the right hand here.
if all these early experiences involved being nudged in different directions, that's an indication of their value, as we will learn in today's paper.
That's a nice segue.
Hey, Darren, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Oh, hey, Michael. Love is the law, love under will.
Today we're looking at Notes for an Astral Atlas, the third appendix from Book 4.
ABA, Liber ABA.
Yeah, I was almost on the tip of my tongue to say Magick in Theory and Practice, but I don't know if that third book itself has its own appendices.
Well, yeah, when you get Magick in Theory and Practice on its own, it does have that
It does have the appendixes, but when you get the big blue brick, are the appendixes all appended, or are they right in the middle between?
Yeah, that's a little bit more complicated, I guess, by the inclusion of
this
Equinox
is why
of the Gods.
People tune in, is to hear us talk about,
They want to hear old men get confused.
They want to hear the esoteric publishing details. They want to know exactly what page everything's on. That's their first question. That's why we're here.
Reference the footnote number.
What did you think of our paper this week?
I thought it couldn't be more perfectly planned if we had actually stopped to think about it for 5 minutes. The
invisible hand is at work.
Exactly. We were just doing the paper by Hume, David Hume, and this segues perfectly into Crowley's thought, because he's basically directly referencing the same ideas as Hume was talking about in that previous paper, which is really cool. Not only that, but I was noticing this paper, Notes for an Astral Atlas, is pretty much like a nice little compendium of a great number of the episodes that you and I have done. There's a lot of references to all these same subjects that we've gone over, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I wonder about that. How much there's no limit to the amount of material, right? I mean, even just Magick Without Tears could be 4 seasons.
Yeah,
there's a lot of letters. But the question is to what extent we end up just belaboring the same points. And would it be better to just refer people to previous episodes to get their glimpse of what 0 equals 2 means or something? Or then the serious ones will actually go and read the papers. My hunch is that there's a lot of material to go over that could keep us going for a long while. But as you're saying, each time we do one of these, many things seem similar and, a slightly different take or something. But
especially when it comes to these pieces where you can tell they were written around the Cefalù period, because he's very much, probably got a head full of cocaine. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense. It's just, people who are doing cocaine are very busy, let's say. But he's like, he's really passionately taken on his role by this point of the world teacher kind of perspective and trying to get Thelema across. So we see in this brief period of Cefalù, just only a couple of years, he's like really pushing a lot of similar ideas.
Yeah, as we've said earlier this season, it's an incredibly productive period for him. But when you're writing a lot of things really fast and really trying to work something out, right? It's like you might run over some of the same points. It seems inevitable. I want to go back to talking about what you said about the relationship to the Hume paper. Forgive me, this might be sort of like the blind leading the deaf or something, because I'm not actually a very deeply read philosophy student, but I want to put this in a little bit of context, because I think his approach is interesting. We have this famous Descartes paper called The Meditations on First Philosophy, where he tries this experiment of hyperbolic doubt, trying to just doubt everything. And he goes like, well, we can tell it's not a dream because dreams sort of feel different. But like by doubting the impressions of his senses in a systematic way, he decides a bunch of things that it obviously isn't. Like, it obviously isn't a dream. It obviously isn't, this or that. But what about what the Hindus say? What about the illusion of Maya? What if there really is an evil demon who's got us imprisoned and is projecting all these things onto our senses. Like we actually just can't be fully sure. And he solves this problem by saying, by proving that there's a God. And since there's a God, there can't be a demon, because a good God would never possibly deceive us. So the world is real. And so it's this thing where there's this stimulating question, but this unsatisfying answer. And so the rest of like ontology and epistemology for several hundred years is people trying to re-answer Descartes' skepticism, and Hume does this. Hume goes like, "Oh, I guess you're right. We observe objects, but maybe we don't observe causes. And like, what would science look like if we couldn't observe causes?" And then Kant, who's referenced not by name but almost directly in this paper, when he does mention things in themselves, Kant will say like, "Okay, well, we have these objects that give us sense impressions, and we know that this object gives me the impression of what I like that, but that's the only thing I know about the object. The actual thing in itself is somewhat remote." And then they do all this kind of work with this doubt to try to build a science that works, even if we're skeptical. And so Crowley here is taking those tools, the skepticism and the idea of sense impressions, but then saying that like, well, I have sense impressions of Iowas or the wizard Amalantra or various demons. And so if I doubt that, my pen and paper are real, but I work with the sense impressions, and say that that's good enough to do science, then it doesn't matter that I doubt that there are ghosts. If I'm having sense impressions appropriate to ghosts, then I just have to deal with them as if they're real. And it's a very, very different use of those tools, right? Like, because Kant and Hume are asking, how do I deal with the fact that I'm in the real world, despite the fact that I don't know it, that I'm living with this. I
have nothing I can rely on to verify it.
Yeah, I can only verify my senses with my senses. So that starts to feel spooky. But the question is how do we do science with real perceived objects? Whereas Crowley is like opening this window for you to. So we say gaslighting when I'm trying to convince you that you're crazy. What's the word where I'm trying to make you crazy without you noticing it? Like, I guess brainwashing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's gaslighting as well, but it's like, yeah, it could be brainwashing.
So it's like Crowley is trying to give you so like when you start having these experiences, that you sort of are more ready to accept them, which is like a schizophrenic thing to want, right? It's like, oh, I believe in my hallucinations. So you'll spend half the paper setting up this sort of philosophical world, right, in which we can believe in our more obscure, more subtle, more bizarre kinds of sense impressions that most people don't even have, but which you might start having once you do ceremonial work. And then the second half of the paper, he'll go like, take all this with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Try to be really, really skeptical and like test the spirit and make sure they're real. But he just said the whole premise is that we don't know that anything's real.
Well, that's the tricky thing of it. Yeah. It's kind of opening up the territory for this possibility of some of these crazy ideas being true, or some of these crazy experiences having some actual verification to them or something like that. But then realizing how dangerous that territory is once you've opened up to it. So, being able to distinguish between the fact that you're going to get your ego really boosted by your own ideas, and versus if you are actually communicating with an outside being, intelligence or something, then there should be a sense of information that wasn't already pre-existing within yourself that you can at least tell was there, and B, a sense of that otherness. Like as he says, like the self kind of revolts against the idea of, or the feeling of, an other. Like the existence of another is somehow offensive to the self in some way. But even that can, be overcome and that sort of thing. So it becomes like, this difficult dance. And it is a dangerous dance. I mean, I've met no shortage of people who, it's the type of thing where I know for myself, I feel like I have some idea of how to approach things in this light. But even then, I've definitely encountered dangerous periods where it's like, okay, luckily I was able to pull myself back before I got too deep into this particular frame of mind. Whereas, it's easy to assume that everybody else is just, in the same way of looking at things as you are. But then you discover, oh, wait a minute, no. Other people, might just be more inclined to get lost in the madness of it.
That is really helpful because I was perceiving a sort of contradiction between the really tight philosophical argument he makes that you shouldn't a priori reject the idea of astral beings, right? Like and that you should allow yourself. You should allow at least hypothetically these invisible beings into your ontology, and then saying that, like, let's be radically skeptical about our astral
don't just
visions.
assume that these things are real.
To me, that seemed like a direct contradiction. But the way you're talking about it now, I'm starting to see that maybe we don't a priori reject the idea of astral beings. It is possible they're out there, and we should respect our sense impressions in the same way we respect other sense impressions. But then, then what's the criteria for a sense impression that rises to the level of evidence of astral being?
Yeah.
So it's not like believe in this, don't believe in this.
Yeah.
It's a sort of question of what evidence would rise to the level of making us believe in this.
Yeah.
So because I was a little bit turned around, and I was thinking that, like, this is like self brainwashing, like this is, and the reason people complain that Crowley doesn't cite his sources and stuff, right? And he never mentions Kant or Hume in this article. He mentions some French scientist. But maybe the reason he doesn't mention Kant or Hume is that he's not taking their arguments in good faith, right? Like, he's trying to say something else about the astral world that they would simply not admit, And so the fact that he's sort of building on their arguments in a way that is maybe seems not in good faith, because it's like, you can't go to Kant to say, there's an angel in my living room.
Yeah.
Although Kant does have an argument about the reality of God that I forget the nuance there. But
yeah, I think there's also an element of, I do think Crowley consistently does something similar to what I was just describing in myself, where I think I know what's, if I'm approaching things with the way that he's suggesting, I think I know I can do that in a capable way, even if, I don't want to have too much hubris about it and then get lost in the mix. But realizing that other people are in different places with it as far as that goes, and realizing that they're not able to see it the same way that I am seeing it, or, have the same approach even, that's easy to forget. It's easy to just unconsciously assume other people know the things that you know and think about things in the way that you think about them in some way. And I feel like Crowley does this in the sense that, in this case, he probably assumes you know what he's talking about when he's referencing Kant or Hume and these ideas. He's kind of feels like he's having a conversation with people who are part and parcel of the conversation already. So he does this quite a bit, where he'll be, I feel like that's my impression of why he doesn't name his references a lot of the time and that sort of thing, or his sources and whatnot.
There's also, maybe he's also trying to avoid the appeal to authority, like, especially in a case where it's inappropriate. You know, like oh, Kant says this, so we should believe this. It's like, well, Kant didn't believe that, so maybe I don't want to appeal to Kant's authority.
Not only that, but he does specifically. I mean, the fact that he's talking about Poincaré, if I'm pronouncing that right, Poincaré. He's
some French scientist.
Oh God. Yeah, sorry. He's specifically not only referencing but citing at length this person's ideas. So that's that's in square opposition to the idea that he doesn't name his sources and stuff like that as well.
Well, he's selective about it.
Yeah.
One would want the footnotes to be footnotes and not just parenthetical insertions.
Yeah. If it was a copy-paste situation back then, that would have been exactly what it was, just copying and pasting chunks of text.
So we've given good clues. What's the paper about this week? So if I were to say like notes for an atlas, if somebody sent me their atlas and I were to write notes, I might say like, oh, Canada has lots of nice lakes and a functional apartheid system. Try the rye.
Try the poutine.
Yeah, but I think this is notes for someone who doesn't know how to write an atlas. and it's just like notes for how to construct an astral atlas. Does that make...
it's funny because so the impression seems to be that he's giving is that this paper was written in response to a student at Cefalù, I believe, if not.
That's right. It says a certain abbey of Thelema, and there was only one in Crowley's lifetime.
And that was a certain abbey of Thelema. It was absolutely certain.
It was for a specific student who I don't remember who now. But
yeah, me neither. But it was for the specific student, and I think referred to in the feminine, but then he liked to refer to, it's like the aspirants to AA are men, and the initiates of AA are women. So I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if he referred to AA brethren in the third person as women, as feminine.
Anno 7 Sol in Virgo, so written in... Oh, no, Anno 17 Sol in Virgo, so that would have been 1921. For Sorer Rodon, a probationer of the AA who at that time was in enjoyment of the privilege of a sojourn in a certain secret abbey of Thelema.
So I think I'm totally wrong with my whole rant there. Sorer Rodon would just be Sorer Rodon.
Yeah, so that, but I don't know whose aspiration name is Rodon.
Yeah, and it seems like this is somebody who's like, okay, well, I want to understand the astral planes better. Can you help me out here? And so he sits down to write about the astral planes and admittedly goes on more of a tangent about, I think he gets into the, you could say in the weeds a little bit about just the justification for wanting to explore the astral planes. And the fact that there's like justification at all for thinking that you can gain any real information from what could otherwise be argued as simply a visualization, an imaginary journey that you're going on and that sort of thing.
I think the reason that it's not what I thought it was, in terms of cliff notes for what you'll encounter in various astral countries, is that he thinks he's already done that. Like 777 is that, what's the fairy tale about the teen girl and her fairy prince?
The Bible? Oh, no, sorry, the Lola Daydream.
Lola Daydream is that. And so this is more about the correct attitude to approach the construction of your own Astral Atlas, and it begins with the question of sort of whether or not these spiritual beings are even worth talking to.
And I may seem like I'm being somehow derogatory by describing it as being in the weeds, but I think it's like actually much more useful in its present state than it would have been if he had been just sort of delineating, well, there's this plane, there's this plane, there's this plane, or anything like that. I think because what he's doing here is outlining more to the point, again, as he defines it, the purpose or the goal of religion. which in his mind is to establish the existence of intelligences that are not in a body, essentially. I mean, generally speaking, we tend to think of religions as being caught up with the idea of God, and that's one example of an intelligence that would not have a body or not be incarnated in the way that we are physically incarnated. But I mean, he's saying he's keeping that much more loose in this pithy definition, so that which I think is a really fascinating way of like, this is an exciting idea. The idea of like, well, let's establish the existence of intelligences outside of the human body and establish means of communicating with such intelligences. And that alone is a super exciting idea. And then he goes on to use as an example of this kind of process, not just astral ideas, but his own experience of having received the Book of the Law and using some of the anecdotal proofs that he discovered, which are a little bit more delved into in the Equinox of the Gods and this sort of thing, and like just his experiences with Frater Achad turning out to be the magical son who revealed the keyword to the Book of the Law and this sort of thing. But this is like his proof to humanity that such intelligences do indeed exist, and this is a hortation to humanity that it is worthwhile pursuing this project. The most important aspect of which for the individual is the trying to contact the intelligence known as the Holy Guardian Angel.
If it seems mysterious to people, this question of why is the aim of religion to establish that non-physical as entities exist, like how could that's not what religions do. If you're a little bit cynical, you might say the aim of religion is to manipulate large numbers of people into cooperating at a societal level. Or a more charitable reading might be to say the aim of religion is to learn and teach God's law. There's an Old Testament quotation that's been running around in my mind the last couple of months that says, like, to prepare the way for God in the wilderness, you know. And so, but if you want to learn and teach God's law, the first step is to establish that means anything. And you can't learn and teach God's law if supersensory beings do not exist. Like,
well, you know. Admittedly you can, and it can be just used as a social tool without any actual basis in reality. But what you would need for that is an elite priesthood that would be the moderator between you and this imaginary God.
Yeah, well,
and such a thing has never existed in the history of mankind.
Oh, for sure. But I'm trying to be a little less cynical than that and say that the term God's law would actually have any meaning. You know, it's not just the law we all agree upon and then attribute to a fictional character called God.
I guess that's true, because the other thing you would need,
invisible beings want.
Yeah, the other thing you would need is to base your religion on belief, and that would be how you distinguish your religion, is you'd have to be a believer in order for it to be true, which is a ridiculous idea that Hume did actually point out in his paper, not as ridiculous, but actually as a justification for Christianity.
Is it David Hume that says something like faith is belief without evidence?
Oh, I don't remember. I might have been Berkeley. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But I'm no expert on that. But
Bishop Berkeley says faith is belief. Sorry. Anyway, look, here's my problem, and this is why I've been small talking you a little bit. Crowley has a reputation for humor and verbosity, and maybe overly flowery language. But a lot of times when we read stuff together, it becomes clear that he's really going concisely, point by point by point by point. And especially when he's trying to work out a philosophical argument that he doesn't completely understand himself, he starts numbering the paragraphs to try to establish propositions. And it becomes the case that it's very difficult to leave anything out because he's intentionally constructing like he says, a pyramid, right?
Yeah.
And so
it's like Spinoza using a geometric
I don't know
layout.
what the point is of marking out quotes to read when I've
we
just
could
put
pretty much
quotation marks around the first 3 pages. So I don't know how to begin.
You could put an opening quote at the beginning of the paper and a closing one at the end, pretty much. Well, that's a good question. I would say, would you be willing to humor me? The quoted passage from Poincaré, I had translated into English. How would you feel about me reading through that whole paragraph?
You spent so much money on it, hiring an entire team of expert French-English translators.
Yeah, Egyptian, French-English translators.
Yeah.
I don't know why I went to Egypt, to be honest. That was an extra expense that apparently didn't need to be.
They have the finest linguists in the world over there, so I'm told by you.
Well, yeah, I assume so because I hired them. Why would I hire them if
they were the most expensive, so I assume that makes them the finest.
Yeah. They were the first ones I came across.
They were the best, i.e. most immediate translators.
Geometry axiom, therefore, a priori, judgment, facts. Maybe they weren't that good. Hold on, let me try and reassess that. Geometric axioms are therefore neither a priori synthetic judgments nor experimental facts. They are conventions. That's kind of interesting in and of itself. Not interesting, but it should be very clear that that's the case, I think, but it's easy to lose track of. But I should also mention that this is, it's translated from the French because in the notes of this paper, Crowley included the French passages without any kind of English translation. This is my motivation for wanting to read this on here.
Well, it's important because in both Hume and Kant, Euclid's geometry is used as the example of what an a priori judgment would look like. We're dealing directly with ideas and building systems out of relations between ideas. The idea of a straight line, the idea of a triangle, the idea of degree, the idea of number. We don't need physical evidence. We just need a pen and paper and a straight edge, and we can work out all this stuff because it's all mental, right? Like, and so the judgments we make about geometry are like a formalized a priori, like completely internal to the mind series of judgments. And he just straight away says, no, it isn't. And you could say like, well, okay, no, it isn't because we're building stuff. So like we start by observing rough triangles in the real world. And then we kind of imagine perfect triangles in our mind. He goes, no. It's not evidence-based either. It's not a material science either. It's just a convention. We've all agreed that this is the best geometry. So it is an important distinction, at least compared to other stuff we've read and the way we've talked about it in the past.
Yeah, fair. And he goes on to say, so what are we to make of this question? Is Euclidean geometry true? It makes no sense. You might as well ask whether the metric system is true and the old measurements false, them being conventions as well. Whether Cartesian coordinates are true and polar coordinates false. One geometry can't be truer than another. It can only be, quote unquote, more convenient. And Crowley's going to use this idea of convenience being, maximum convenience being our judgment for truth. And then he goes on to say, what we mean is that by natural selection, our minds have adapted to the conditions of the outside world, adopting the geometry that is most advantageous to the species, or in other words, the most convenient. This is entirely consistent with our conclusions. Geometry is not true, it is advantageous. And so I went on to read his paper that Crowley references at some point here as well on the nature of space, I think it was. And he's basically breaking down, trying to understand how our existence as individual human beings would benefit from a particular engagement with the reality around us. So I think he uses, for instance, the idea that if you were to increase the size of everything exponentially, like where 100 centimeters becomes 100 meters. If everything was likewise increased in size, you'd wake up in the morning and have no idea. There would be nothing to tell you any difference about it.
Right.
So the idea being that everything is, I basically what he works towards is he starts talking about you as an individual from your point of position, and the idea of position in space at all is arbitrary. It's all relative. So, which is a big important kind of evolution of thought at that time, because it's just before or leading into Einstein's theory of relativity and everything like that. So the idea of relativity in general was very much the new thought, I guess, the new idea of things. And so he's picturing you as a being have interactions with things around you, and he describes them in terms of attack and parry. So like thinking of it in terms of like how you protect yourself or attack somebody else and that sort of thing. So it's like you have options at your disposal at any given moment with the world around you and that sort of thing. So, and he tries to break it down into points, like, okay, if A happens, then A1 can be your response. But then it's like he starts breaking that down into, and you can, it's the interesting thing about that, I'm not completely sure I completely got it, but the idea that I sort of took away from it was that as he goes through these different points, breaking them down into separate points, he realizes that there's overlap and therefore gradients to things. And in reading this, I really got an idea of, okay, I could see where Crowley's reading a lot of this type of stuff, and it's coming out in his own writing when he's referring to things in similar terms, which was kind of interesting.
So the first section of this, Notes for an Astral Atlas, Section 1, the question is, what are astral or spiritual beings? He says, man is one. It is the case of any consciousness assuming sensible form. There's a lot there, and I don't... microcosms and elementals. Microcosm being you're an individual, like humans are microcosms, and they exist in worlds, and the elemental... You think of elemental spirits, but here he uses the example of a dog. Mm-hmm. A dog also exists in only part of the world that humans do. They can understand language, but they can't use language. They often don't have jobs. Mm-hmm. They don't understand currency. They might look at the moon occasionally, but they don't know about Mars and Mercury and Jupiter. And so a dog is an elemental because it is only one element. Even its whole world can only be an element of the world of human beings. And he says it may be the case that these elementals are microcosms of different macrocosms. And this is where he makes the reference to Poincaré, because this question about whether different elementals live in slightly different universes that are macrocosms to their microcosms, we can't decide on this question the same way we can't decide on different kinds of space a la Poincaré. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of reference he's making.
Yeah.
Is this question of other minds is necessarily opaque to us. And with Kant, I think he knows that people have human minds, which to me seems insane. But I think he's accepting that man is microcosm, and that it's only other kinds of animals that become mysterious to us.
Yeah, and I'm going to finish off this little quote here. We will therefore choose these rules not because they are true, but because they are the most convenient. And we could sum them up by saying, the simultaneity of two events, or the order of their succession, the equality of two durations, must be defined in such a way that the statement of natural laws is as simple as possible. In other words, all these rules and definitions are not just the result of unconscious opportunism.
So where this becomes important for Crowley, maximum convenience is our canon of truth, right?
Mm-hmm. That's the phrase.
We live in this world of which we're skeptical. We have sense impressions, but we don't know what objects generate them. We only know those objects, those things in themselves, have the power to generate those impressions. or to impress upon us those impressions. So if we start seeing ghosts, the question is it easier to imagine that the haunted person has latent psychic abilities and every time it manifests they get scared and imagine a ghost? Like, is that easier? Or is it easier to imagine a poltergeist? Mm-hmm. And it's an open question, like what's easier for you? But it's easier for me sitting here talking to you to treat you as if you really exist, even though my true will formula is having me do all these meditations right now where I imagine the world as non-existent and myself as a little robot that I'm driving through this world that doesn't exist. The illusion of Maya thing, right? But in practice, we acknowledge the objective existence of other beings. And so if we start having astral visions to say like, oh, it was a dream, it was a this, it was a that, but I got useful information from it. So like, is it my own subconscious reporting things that I didn't know that I knew? Or is it more convenient to just say spirits exist?
Yeah.
And so,
and I think the important takeaway from that, or I guess the important consideration is that you don't need to lean too heavily to a conclusion. Meaning it's not about like saying, because I acknowledge, like, we could have one of those drunken philosophical or stoned philosophical questions about, well, how do I know you exist, man? And like kind of doubt the existence of other people and that sort of thing. But like you say, it's more convenient to assume that the other person does indeed exist and interact with them and that sort of thing. And we can do that happily without ever really worrying about it. If you're dealing with something like a ghost or like some one of these kinds of sort of spooky kinds of interactions that we're talking about, it's a little more difficult. I think the reason we tend to trust our senses and our interactions with other people and our interactions with the world around us and that sort of thing is because those senses are persistent. Mm-hmm. Whereas like something like going on an astral journey is not in the same way. So like it's a much more permeable type of existence and that sort of thing. So we tend to question things a little bit more heavily as a result. And so like if I'm interacting with you, I don't have to have an existential crisis about it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It can be a very casual thing without me even giving it any second thought, aside from to entertain myself with thoughts of maybe I'm the only one who actually exists.
One answer to the question of hyperbolic doubt, it's like, how do I know that my senses are telling me the truth? Could be like an evolutionary argument. You would say, we evolved the senses we have because they're the most useful for survival. Mm-hmm. The first kind of photoreceptors that develop. It turns out that because of the way light bounces around, it's very, very useful to find food and escape predators if you can perceive light. And so as photoreceptors get better and better and eyes begin to evolve, we have more and more successful animals. So it must be the case that our eyes are telling us the truth, because if our eyes were lying to us, they wouldn't have helped us survive. They wouldn't be such a pervasive adaptation. Almost all animals have.
Well, interestingly, Poincaré in his paper that I read uses that example, but he uses the example of, for instance, kind of like tribal peoples or whatnot, where they're fishing, like spear fishing, and they see the fish in the water, but they can adjust for the refraction of light.
Yeah.
Because, when you see on the surface of the water, you see the reflection, and that's not a true representation of where the position of the creature is or the bottom of the water. So they learn to adjust for that refraction of light. That is kind of an interesting addition to what you're saying, or adjustment, where it's pointing out, well, we're not seeing what's true per se. It's like truth is a little bit more, we're seeing what has maximum convenience to us.
Well, so there's a subtle modification maybe to Kant, is the only thing I know about my clipboard is that it has the power to convey the sense of a clipboard. Mm-hmm. No, I also know that those impressions are good enough for me to interact with it as a clipboard and use it for what I need. So it still doesn't tell me what the thing in itself is, but it's much more complete picture, right? Because it tells me what it is to me and how I can use it. And so, but you can still imagine, and this is, I promise we're still talking about the paper, because you can imagine that we've developed, on a certain plane of existence with the 5 special senses that we have, and that those senses are important for us understanding the objects that are critical to our survival. And that's why we evolved them, and then that's fine. But you can imagine that in the universe, there are other objects coharmonious with us that where information about those objects is not particularly important for our survival. There might be a whole other race of some sort of, antelope that's invisible and insensible and we don't share food with it. Maybe maybe it does photosynthesis. Yeah. So we don't need to fight for light or something like that.
Yeah, the simplest example of that is just the visible spectrum of light.
Sure.
The argument that, well, the stuff that's outside of the visible spectrum of light, that's obviously not as important for our immediate survival, so we don't sense it.
So Crowley's going to say it's not, even though we may say that we evolved the senses we have for our survival, and they do give us good information about the world, it's totally possible to imagine other beings that just don't appeal to those senses and share space with us. And so the gist of section 1 is that there's no a priori reason to deny the existence of conscious intelligences within sensible bodies.
So he's opening up the floor for a range of possibilities here instead of closing it off to. So it's like taking what Hume was saying, and instead of using it to limit what we're capable of knowing, Crowley's seeing a door that he can open.
And then in subsequent sections, he'll say that, okay, so let's allow for the possibility of invisible beings that aren't important for our survival, so we haven't evolved the senses to interact with them. Well, then how could we interact with them? And he's going to give examples of ways in which we do interact with other beings, both, material and immaterial, sometimes invisible, like, we have a relationship with bacteria, some beneficial, some harmful, even though we can't perceive them with any of our senses, even though being able to perceive them with our senses would be advantageous for our survival, knowing, my telephone has only healthy bacteria. Oh, my telephone has some unhealthy bacteria. I'm going to wipe that off. We haven't evolved the senses to understand those things. They fly under the radar, but the bacteria still controls things about our destiny, has its own goals, its own, volition. I won't say desires, but, bacteria tries to reproduce and get to environments that are beneficial for it. And if that means making us sick, they don't particularly know or care, but we influence each other. And so it's possible that these insensible beings, these hypothetical insensible beings, that we are actually able to communicate with them with some yet undefined technology. Right. And so he's obviously that technology is going to be ceremonial magic, or daydreaming or something. But it's, again, he's using these tools that are usually used to say, we don't know things. We don't know things. How do we work if we don't know things? To say
basically, we don't know things, so don't assume.
To say maybe we do know, maybe there's all these things we can act as if we know, even though they're obscure.
Yeah, which I think is there's a definite legitimacy to that, because it could easily come off as being a little bit too unscientific and a little bit too woo-woo. But it's legitimately, I think that basically if you're cutting off saying, well, we only know this particular thing, or we don't even know this particular thing, then you can't discuss, the things that are outside of our current range of abilities to discuss, then that's closing yourself down gradually so that there's less and less that you can actually talk about.
Well, like I said, it sort of reads like brainwashing, right? Because it's like a bad faith use of the Kant and Hume. It doesn't do the things that those tools were designed to do, and then it opens you up to sort of having very schizophrenic seeming thoughts, right? And Crowley says the only difference between a crazy person and a genius is that the genius's thoughts are well organized.
Yeah.
And so this is a tool, the 777, which this is like supposed to work with. These are notes for construction. Those are the footnotes or something, are supposed to help you organize the madness that comes out of this. And it is true that we usually don't prove negative propositions, right? If I say there is no God and you say prove it, the fact that there is no God means there's no evidence.
Yeah.
Which
is reasonable.
If I say, I can say, a cat burglar broke into my house last night and didn't leave any evidence. And you would say,
where's the evidence?
You would say, where's the evidence? And
you're like, exactly.
It's like he was like, well, you can't prove he wasn't there.
Well, let me use an example that just comes to mind. We were just before recording, we were talking about the idea of criticizing democracy, for instance. Like, it's a very common thing to, if you have any criticisms about democracy, to be confronted with the argument that, well, it's the best system we have, and if you're going to criticize it, then you should give a better alternative. And that's a false argument, because it's like, no, you should be able to criticize anything, So criticizing something that you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of a similar thing in the sense that it's like, well, if we're saying ghosts don't exist, so there's no reason to look into it. It's like, well, you can look into it all you want. There's no reason to, cut that whole. Maybe you won't find anything. Maybe the person who smugly says ghosts don't exist, you're not going to find anything. Maybe they're completely utterly right, and you're just going to waste all your time. But I still think it's worth, having people out there looking into different things, especially the things that everybody's not looking into, because that's how, if you think back a couple hundred years to the things that people weren't looking into, including bacteria, then, that's maybe where the advances started to come with looking into bacteria and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? So
these accusations that I'm making against Crowley in this paper, saying that like it's like a God of the gaps argument. A Christian apologist will say atheists can't account for how consciousness controls matter, or they can't account for how
the argument is that we've made up something that does that.
That's right. Atheists can't account for the creation of the universe. They don't know how something comes from nothing. You can't account for it either, man. Just saying God did it is not an account.
That's not an account.
How did God did it?
Yeah.
What is God?
Where do you point to this? No, it's based on belief. You have to believe in order to. Yeah, it's just.
So Crowley's saying you can't tell me there's no such thing as spirits because you don't actually know. We don't just because we don't see evidence for there's no. But here's the problem with accusing Crowley of this, is that what he's trying to do is not purely an intellectual exercise the way the Christian apologists are doing. Crowley's trying to account for numerous experiences that he's had using magical techniques, trying to understand how they work, and saying that, like, I don't know if spirits exist, but it's way easier to act as if they exist because I've had so many vivid experiences of them doing the things I asked them to do, or telling me things that I didn't already know. And that's why the example of the Book of the Law is important. And then if he teaches you magical techniques, you can start to have some of these spooky experiences that make you join the AA or go back to massage school or become a Thelemite when previously you were a Satanist. And like, is it easier to say that I changed my mind because like I had an acid trip and then I changed my mind, or I didn't take any acid. I just, waved a magic wand around. So this is only the first step in the argument. It's not, you can't prove the non-existence of insensible beings, therefore these 5 exact angels that are in my system. It's I've had experiences with these 5 exact angels, and now what do I do with that?
Yeah. And actually, it's kind of nice, too, because what you were talking about earlier, where you were trying to resolve the fact that he starts the paper out saying, no, you should open yourself up to these things, and then later on changes tact where he's sort of saying you should be very skeptical of these things. And then we had sort of a marriage of those ideas somewhere in there as well. It brings to mind, because he does reference the Lashtal formula in this paper, and I want to sort of bring that up because it feels like that's a good application of that as sort of is something in the back of your head for conceptualization purposes. Because the Lashtal formula, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's the keyword of the Book of the Law in forward and reverse, depending on which one you want to think of as forward and reverse. But A-L in Hebrew would give us the word for God, Aleph, Lamed, or one of the words for God, El. And if you reverse it, you get L-A, or Lamed Aleph, which gives us Lo. And that's the Hebrew word for no, or not, as Crowley likes to take it. And so when you oppose those two ideas, you end up with no God, or, the balancing of those two ideas. And then he gives a third, like each of those, of course, equals to the same number, which is 31. He gives another 2-letter kind of word that he equates to 31 by an interesting little quirk, and it's the sh. And when we have those 3 things, it sort of brings to mind, now that I'm thinking about it, it brings to mind his the way he likes to talk about things, where you have you oppose everything by its opposite, and then you transcend to, it's like they become the base of a triangle, whose apex, I suppose, would be that kind of point. Where they unify or coagulate or play off of each other, or are destroyed in a glorious orgasm that proceeds into a new reality or whatnot.
Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life imagining the apex as the shit point. Thank you very much.
I know, it's hard to there's certain things that going on that tend to sort of sabotage taking any of this too seriously, which may be a point in itself.
Well, I mean, he says not to take it seriously, but here's the problem. And this is a paper where Crowley may be seen to be waffling, right? Like I said, by spending the first half of the paper trying to open the door for the existence of astral beings, and then the second half of the paper telling you to be skeptical. And someone like Stephen Skinner, who thinks that Crowley was never had a theory of magic his whole life, like that he was always waffling between a psychological model and a spirit model, and could never really commit to the spirit model, and that somehow sabotaged his work.
That does sound like somebody attributing their own personal conceptions onto, like projecting them onto somebody. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, I don't want to slag off Skinner too much, because his work has been so valuable, but he obviously just doesn't understand Crowley. I read his stuff; it's fine. So here it says, thus we may refer physical phenomenon to the intention of astral beings without committing ourselves to any theory. Coherence is the sole quality demanded of us. So he's saying, if what's her name in The Exorcist? If Regan is her head's spinning around and she's spraying vomit everywhere, it's way easier to say she's possessed.
Let's get a priest, because the CAT scans aren't doing it.
Yeah. We can't take her to that really bizarre 70s therapy institute she was in Exorcist 3. We're just going to say it's demons. And we don't have to believe in demons necessarily to say it's demons. But
By the way, I want to correct you. It was Exorcist 2 where she goes to that weird institute. Exorcist 3 was a banger and had Brad Dourif in a groundbreaking performance.
Absolute vital. Thank you for keeping me honest. I
think Exorcist 3 is like one of my favorite movies, so that's why I had to.
Is that the one where they're in Africa?
No, that's Exorcist 2. That's The Heretic.
Oh.
It's directed by the director of Zardoz. Which itself was admittedly a banger.
But the point here is that in the philosophical tradition that Crowley is trying to work in, or at least drawing inspiration from, you don't believe, scare quotes, in anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always acting as if when we're doing hard science.
Mm-hmm.
And he has what he feels are like scientific level experiences with these entities, and he's trying to understand how they work. And he's also writing for someone who's just a neophyte in the AA and trying to help them not go crazy.
Yeah.
Because as we'll find out later, it's very difficult to distinguish genuine astral beings from daydreams, phantasms,
and this is why,
hallucinations. So being a little bit incredulous is just a preventative medicine.
Yeah. This is why I like to say I see beliefs as being a tool. You can pick that tool up and you can put it back down again. And I think this is what's important to remember when you're going into something like this. This is kind of what Crowley's approach is as well, in the sense of, like, you don't need to go off the rails in one direction or the other. You're balancing yourself. And like in the sense of belief, it's like if you're doing an invocation, during that invocation, you really do want to try and invest yourself in believing as far as you're able in order to get the most out of that invocation. And then you want to be able to put it down when you're done with it. You know, you don't need to get hung up on, do I have everything tied up with a nice bow right this instant? Because you're very well going to hope you're going to be different down the road than you are right this moment, you know?
Astral beings possess knowledge and power of a different kind from our own. Their universe is presumably of a different kind from ours in some respects. It is more convenient to assume the objective existence of an angel who gives us new knowledge than to allege our invocation has awakened a supernormal power in ourselves. Again, this is in the context of an invocation, and in the context of a knowledge and power that you know that you don't possess. So if your child's having night terrors, and it's more convenient to say, it was just a dream, everything's fine, please go to sleep, as long as it's, not affecting their schoolwork or their relationships with other people, or making them feel like, or making them feel like Exorcist Regan, as long as it's just like, 5 minutes of horrible screaming, and then you can calm them down and put them back to sleep, then it was just a dream. Mm-hmm. It's only in these contexts where the spirits seem to have a knowledge and power that you don't have that it becomes more convenient to assume that they have than to treat them as if they exist.
And that's the tricky territory of it, really, is that it's like, where do you decide that they have information that's actually useful to you? I mean, I've definitely interacted with people who have things like auditory hallucinations or, schizophrenic sounding kinds of experiences and that sort of thing. And it's hard for us, like, we're not going to sit here and talk about those kinds of subjects like we're experts on it or have the best advice for it or anything like that. But that's where the danger presumably comes in with this kind of thing, that it's like you can, once you start thinking that there's a being that has useful information for you, it's going to be, it appears to be difficult to shut that idea off and stop completely investing in it.
My ongoing effort to prove that Magick is a tool for driving yourself crazy. Like I said, I've been able to very easily generate this pretty visceral experience of Maya. I've been able to see the illusion a lot lately. If I just kind of like, do the 1,000-yard stare and look past for a few seconds, and then maybe I look at my hands, and then I start to feel like a machine being driven by a spirit, and so the world is not real and I'm not real. And there's these two invisible things, the thing in itself and my consciousness that are, and I can walk around and accomplish tasks in this space of disbelieving in everything around me and wondering what's behind it. And I've been thinking, like, thank God that I have known schizophrenics in my life, because this just is what it's like to be delusional. and so if I were to allow myself to become obsessed with that, or to treat it with too much credulity, or start fantasizing about like what's beyond it. Usually when I see what's beyond it, it's just water. But if I were to see, the cigarette smoking man from the X-Files or the well manicured man or something like that, the
well-dressed man,
then it'd just be like, it would just be the kind of schizophrenic delusion that, and I've done a lot of work to try to like get here. Like, this is like the result of a serious meditation effort. And I don't want to say it's indistinguishable from delusion. It is a delusional, in a sense, it's a delusional state. But I think the fact that I'm able to have this state in what I would call like, with my judgments intact, still able to be polite to people and order a coffee, and it's organized.
Now that's
like
the
genius
important
rather
thing.
than disordered like craziness.
Yeah, because I think the difficulty of things like delusional states or schizophrenia or these kinds of things is that, well, we have these terms for them, first of all, and the terms carry a lot of baggage with them. These types of things, delusional states, schizophrenia, dissociation, any of these kinds of ideas or states of mind are states of mind that everybody is capable of experiencing at any given time. They're not just limited for crackpots or, people that you want to think of as other in some way. They are present with all of us. It's just that, people who are in a bad place with them are too heavily into that kind of state of mind. So I think that's the difficulty of like the language end of things and our experience of these types of things, is that we think of them as being, well, that's a broken person or something like that. You know what I mean? And you associate it with that. But the fact of the matter is, we all carry with us, it's like the idea that we all carry with us that murderous part. We're all capable of bashing somebody's head in with a brick. It's not a pretty sight, and most of us would like to pretend like we don't, or at least staunchly believe that we don't actually, you could never do something like that. Well, yeah, you could never do something like that until the precise moment happened to come up, and then you'd feel differently.
I was going to say there's no cult of people devoted to turning other people into the kind of person that would smash a stranger's head in with a brick. But then I remembered that the military existed.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we're not alone here in deliberately driving people crazy.
Yeah.
But you think, there's secret chiefs controlling everything. The material reality isn't reality, but there's like this top secret club of highly realized individuals subtly controlling history. That's a delusion. And it's a very common delusion couched in spiritual terms. It's like, if you work hard enough, you can see demons. That's a hallucination. You miss your grandma. Let me try to channel her. That's a dissociative identity kind of moment. So, like, and I sort of had this idea the other day that like occult techniques, magic, is a tool for turning melancholic depression into delusional psychosis. I think those were the two: clinical depression and delusional psychosis. And so, because I have I don't think I have clinical melancholic depression. I think I have what's called like paradoxical depression sometimes. So the occult techniques do not work on me appropriately. That's why some people seem to have more facility with magic, because they're just they have more melancholic depression. I don't know. I'm just being silly.
No, I mean, there's probably some legitimacy to that as well, and just in terms of like a form of will to power, in the sense of, like, say for instance, just helplessness. Being in a state of helplessness is being angry is more empowering than being helpless. So if you're in a state of helplessness, getting angry can be a means of shoehorning yourself out of being helpless and that scary sort of place. So a lot of the transmutation of these feelings and things might just be a matter of some kind of will to empower oneself. But let's carry on.
We don't need to go into this too much, but Kant has this idea that time and space are faculties. They're not parts of the universe. Each person in their own mind has time and space, and we use it to perceive the world. So here's just more evidence that he's, without saying it, sort of exploiting these tools, right? Time and space are forms by which we obtain images of ideas. Our measures of time and space are crude conventions and differ widely for different beings. So he's sort of using it's just a little bit of Kant interjected for kind of no reason. And then I had 10 and 11 marked out to read as just one big chunk. So let's try to do that, and it might close this section, and we can get on to talking about the skepticism part. But we may admit that any aspect of any object or idea may be presented to us in symbolic form, whose relation to its being is irrational. There is no rational link between seeing a bell struck and hearing its chime. Our notion of bell is no more than a personification of its impressions on our senses, and our wit and power to make a bell to order implies a series of correspondences between various orders of nature precisely analogous to magic. When we obtain the vision of beauty by using certain colors, forms, sound, etc. So this is, again, Kant, he's talking about things in themselves, right? And he's saying that the bell is just a series of sense impressions. The bell is a shape. We have an idea of shape, and it's a sound. And when the sound and the shape go together, the object is called a bell. But like Hume, we don't have any sense of cause and effect, you know. But
it's like the clipboard. The clipboard to you exists as a clipboard. In space outside of you, it's just. To pretend like I know what I'm talking about, it's just some various forms of matter that have coagulated due to other causes and whatnot. Having
kittens is a perfect illustration, right? Like, there are objects that are certain things to me, and then to kittens, it's just like to me, my phone charger is very, very different from like my little bird toy. Yeah. But to the cat, the shape of them, because they look exactly the same.
Just one makes daddy angry.
But here's the techne, right? Like we don't have to understand what a sine wave looks like, or you know, what frequency actually is, the frequency of sound waves moving from the air, to be able to build an object that. So there's a difference between like procedural knowledge and scientific knowledge.
So in a dog, it elicits drooling. In us, it elicits the manufacture of a bell.
And so the astral beings may thus be defined in the same way as material objects. They are unknown causes. Again, remember Hume had the secret cause. They are unknown causes of various observed effects. They may be of any order of existence. We give a physical form and a name to a bell, but not to its tone. Though in each case we may know nothing but our own impressions. We record musical sounds by special convention. We therefore call certain sets of qualities ratial, or describe certain impressions as Saturnian, without pretending to know what anything is in itself. Again, here, things in themselves. All we need to know is how to cast a bell that will please our ears, how to evoke a spirit that will tell us things that are hidden from our intellectual faculties. And so, and I came into this very confused, but talking with you an hour ago about what this paper actually meant is crystallizing it to me. So forgive me if I seem like I'm hitting it again and again and again. It's because I'm discovering it newly as we speak. The idea is that there's this context by which we have a techne that brings these spiritual beings into existence, and they tell us things we didn't know. And so so we can't a priori rule them out just because there's no such thing as ghosts. Like, I mean, there may be no such thing as phone chargers, cats, and clipboards, but
bells may not exist, but you can still use them for their purpose.
But as we sort of said last week, I have as much evidence of that as anything else. You know?
Exactly. Convenience is our canon of truth. Is that maximum convenience?
Maximum convenience is our canon of truth. That's right. Whatever is the most the
most useful and utilitarian for us to do whatever it is we're trying to accomplish.
And so I don't know if I actually need to read 13. I had it marked out to read and sort of talk through it, because this is the turn where it goes from being like admit the idea of ghosts, be skeptical about the idea of ghosts, and I was trying to understand what it said.
To be honest with you, that next one is kind of interesting in that it's the closest to what you might expect some book off the shelf on the Astral Atlas to contain, because he's talking about how everything possesses an astral shape.
Oh yeah, let's not pass over that then. If you want to read it, go ahead.
Every object soever may be considered as possessed of an astral shape. And I notice he says may be considered as opposed to what I said, which everything does contain, which is a better way of putting it. Because again, it's maximum convenience is our canon of truth. So everything may be considered as possessed of an astral shape. You don't have to make a big deal one way or the other about it. Sensible to our subtle perceptions. This astral shape is to its material basis as our human character is to our physical appearance. Our human character. We may imagine this astral shape, e.g., we may see a jar of opium as a soft, seductive woman with a cruel smile. Just as we see in the face of a cunning and dishonest man the features of some animals, such as a fox. So that's maybe, again, going back to the idea of like what that clipboard is in reality outside of you is different to what it is to you, but it only matters to you what it is to you.
I think it's interesting because I think bringing the content of this discussion, you might start to wonder if the astral form of the being is the thing in itself, and that our sense perception it's the difference between the nominal and the phenomenal world in Kantian terms. And here he says our human character as to our physical shape. So it almost implies that, right? Is that we have this human character and the material vehicle, like they're on two different levels. But I don't think we need to go that far in order to understand this. I think it's that we have we have these physical senses, and then we might also have these mental senses, these ideas. And so
because the way that you exist, to me, is kind of a combination of the sense impressions and my synthetic a priori ideas that I attribute to you. So
the object, the bottle of opium, conveys to my senses, my physical senses, my five physical senses, one set of impressions. And then, and we know about the opium that has the power to do that. But then we go and we look at it from a different perspective, this astral dream, creative imagination perspective. And again, we don't learn what the thing is in itself, but we get another view, a side view. We're using different senses to perceive it. So we see what power it has to impress images on those senses, and we're starting to build a 360-degree view of the object.
Which brings to mind like a lot of the ways that people tell stories about interacting with spirits and things is that they seem to interact using your mind and your associations with things. So in this case, it'd be your associations build experiences, inner experiences for you of what that object means, and that also plays into your experience astrally when you're going on astral journeys, or if you're interacting with a spirit or whatnot, they interact with that aspect of your mind. So that I remember our mutual friend who you mentioned earlier was talking about somebody he knew who was invoking Jupiter. And at the time, and I think I might have referenced this on an earlier podcast, but I think she was invoking Jupiter, but she had been watching a ton of The Sopranos. So Jupiter was speaking in a very strong and powerful voice, but started slipping into some of the slang from The Sopranos. So it's that kind of thing where it's like your mind is like a filter for these things as well, which is part of the reason it's important to make, being able to distinguish what's going on.
Yeah, there's some stuff about here that's interesting, and I'm trying to find. Nothing is easier than to suggest visions or fashion phantoms to suit one's own ideas. It is obviously impossible to communicate with the independent intelligence, the one real object of astral research, if one allows one's imagination to surround one with counterfeit courtiers of one's own creation. If one expects one's vision to resemble those of the Master Therion, they are only too likely to do so. Remember, then, always, but especially when dealing with the astral plane, that man's breath stirs the feather of truth. What one sees and hears is real in its way, whether it be itself or distorted by one's desires or created by one's personality. There is no touchstone of truth. The authentic Nichael is indistinguishable from the image of the magician's private idea of Nichael, so far as he is concerned. The stronger one is to create, the more readily the astral light responds and coagulates creatures of this kind. Not that such creation is necessarily an error, but it is another branch of the work. One cannot obtain outside help from inside sources. One must use precautions similar to those recommended in the chapter on divination. So, that's why I marked that out to read, because it's very confusing. So, first of all, it's easy to imagine phantoms, right? Like, it's easy to just close your eyes and start imagining all sorts of shit. And that is not spirit communication, right? That's just fantasizing. And so you have to be rigorous about that. But then there's also this thing about the feather. Man's breath stirs the feather of truth. And so, like, your vision of the angel, when you actually do obtain it, is...
It's yours and no one else's.
And it's also like this relationship of objects to things in themselves. It's like the idea is doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the angel is in itself. You're having your vision of the angel, and that's the image that you should...
It doesn't matter what the clipboard is in itself.
That's the image that you should paste in the atlas, right? Like, you're building your Astral Atlas out of these visions that you experience. And your imagination, like, if you start imagining the form of Jupiter or something, or Ratziel in this example, then the feather of truth will fill that image with the true, Ratziel will actually come and fill that image. But then he finishes it by saying it's not exactly an error, it's just not what we're doing. But it's confusing. He seems to be saying both that you have to guard against fantasy, but that it's fantasy that actually calls the real spirit. But then he says, and if fantasy calls the real spirit, that's not a mistake. It's just not what we're doing. But I don't understand what you just said. And also somewhere else he'll talk about.
There's this passage where he finishes the passage with reference to the demon Crowley, and that might be what you're thinking of for this other passage.
I sort of read the first half of that paragraph and skipped over where it gets more poetic. But yeah, I read the part that says, if you expect your images to resemble the visions of the Master Therion, then they probably will. And that's seen as a problem, because that's not you contacting the spirit and seeing what your relationship with it is like. That's you bringing in this third thing that is someone else's, Liber 418 or whatever. And so the contact is not clean. It's like having CAA on the line listening in, or or like what do they call them? I'm just going to say double agent because I can't remember what the term is. Like the COINTELPRO thing, where you hire a CIA agent to go join black resistance groups and then agitate so the black resistance group starts committing crimes, and then you can arrest them all, even though they probably never would have committed crimes if there weren't CIA instigators. It's like over integrating the Crowley material before you start doing your own work is like, it's like having another person in the room with you.
Yeah, and I think it's more like being too much in Crowley's world and not enough in your own. Because this is and which seems legitimate, because I can actually think of, like, it's very common for people to start having a really bad relationship with Crowley. When they spend a lot of time with Thelema and Crowley, and then come to a place where they have this weird kind of resentment thing, which I don't know. Maybe it seems like maybe there's a paternal thing. It's like he becomes daddy, and then I have this problem with daddy. Maybe that's me over psychologizing it or something like that. But it's like there's something like that comes into play, and the reference to the demon Crowley is kind of an interesting one just to point out, because of the fact that it is part of our whole. This whole background here. At the time, Crowley was surprised when he was in the States, I think, a little bit disconcerted by the fact that sometimes people would get really enthusiastically, into his stuff, but then suddenly have this experience of him that seemed to be like he was totally demonic and all these horrible things. You don't have to go far to find examples of people talking about Crowley in that light, but he was sort of taken aback whenever that would happen, because it was like people seemed to find themselves experiencing, quote unquote, the demon Crowley.
Well, I don't think it necessarily even has to be Crowley. Like these angels' names and different, they show up in pop culture in places, right? And so if you have a couple of good visions of like Michael and Raphael, but then like you have a Yu-Gi-Oh card that has Gabriel on it or something, and then the spirit shows up looking exactly like it does on the card, it's like there's these things from your imagination. It's not your imagination directly in contact with the spirit. It's like your imagination allowing other
your imagination
sorts of
is kind of like the
context filtering in.
It's like that's the medium in which this works, which actually goes with brings to mind Eliphas Levi talking about the astral light being that medium for things, and I think that's tied to the imagination and basically these ideas that we're talking about.
One thing you can do is test the spirit. You can ask it all sorts of questions, and the same way we talked about in our episode on Equinox of the Gods, I think, where Crowley was asking Rose all sorts of questions and getting appropriate answers. And I said in that episode that it worked because Rose was not an initiate and didn't know what the correct answers were supposed to be. And he says, the spirit should be able to answer you according to 777 and Liber D, but these tests, as implied above, will not serve to detect personations. Oh, I see. Personation, like
personification.
The demon is just my person masquerading as a demon. Will not serve to detect personations by self-suggested phantasms, unless one's aura be a welter of muddy symbols beyond recognition. The more autohypnotic the vision is, the more smoothly it satisfies the seer's standards. So actually, if you've memorized all your tables from 777 and you're getting tick, 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 you ask 20 questions and he gives the right answer to all of them, then that might be evidence of foul play. You should get the right answer maybe 18 out of 20 times or something like this. But if at each time your own mind is suggesting the correct answer that you already know, it's very difficult to know whether it's the demon giving you the correct answer or your own mind.
It's really interesting when you can have examples of interactions with spirits where you don't see the answers up front, and it's only after later on down the road. I had something like that, which I can't get into too deeply. It's one of those things that's like I think sometimes these things carry. It's important what it means to you. Just like what we're talking about with the clipboard or whatever the situation might be. It's important what it means to you, and you do want it to be important, like useful information and that sort of thing. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can inflict these things onto other people and that sort of thing. But I had a situation where I had to, I was trying to work something out, and then I asked my angel for help. And my angel gave me a word and said, okay, you need proof? Here's your proof. And I got this word, and I didn't really think, I was kind of like, I'd be surprised if it was actually just, that very same thing. And then months later, I ended up seeing how, this was actually an interesting play on things, because it gave me evidence in a way that I didn't pick up on until after the fact. And I was able to see, oh shit, that was actually really clever how that was done. And it was like, getting that kind of thing is really a blessing. It's a nice confirmation.
Well, that's the kind of thing we're looking for, really, right? Is these tests are these interviews are important, and Crowley used them all the time. Like, he never stopped sort of interrogating spirits, and I guess this sort of confirmation bias was one of the reasons that he over interrogated them, and complains that he sometimes exhausts the spirit or something, because like did you give me that answer? Or did I give you that answer? That's the question. But he says the real test is going to be something about the character of the vision.
An otherness, a sense of I think he says the self revolts at the idea of having to admit of an other. Yeah,
very good. Almost exact quotation. Again, Darren doesn't have it in front of him, so I don't know what the hell is going on. Now, the proof that one is in contact with an independent entity depends on a sensation which ought to be unmistakable if one is in good health. I don't know what that means. That's so funny. One ought not to be liable to mistake one's own sensible impressions for somebody else's. That was a little bit opaque to me the first couple times I read it, but somebody else's meaning like you read 418 too much and now Crowley's ideas are leaking into your visions. It is only man's incurable vanity that makes the astral strayed reveler or the mystic confuse his own drunken babble with the voice of the Most High. The essence of the right sensation consists in recognizing the reality of the other being. There will be, as a rule, some element of hostility, even when the reaction is sympathetic. One's soulmate, even, is not thought of as oneself at first contact. One must therefore insist that any real appearance of the astral plane give the sensation of meeting a stranger. One must accept it as independent, be it archangel or elf, and measure one's own reactions to it. One must learn from it, though one despise it, and love it, however one loathe it. One must realize, upon writing up the record, that the meeting has effected a definite change in one's self. One must have known and felt something alien, and not merely tried on a new dress. There must always be some slight pang of pain in any true astral vision. It hurts the self to have to admit the existence of a not-self. It taxes the brain to register a new thought. This is true of the first touch, even when exaltation and stimulation result from the joy of making an agreeable contact. And I read this a few times, and I thought, like, I don't understand. Like, this, it just something about it escapes me. It's pain. It's pain. Is it painful to admit the existence of the not self? I mean, I meet new people every day. Like every time I go into a coffee shop, there's someone new serving me. Is that painful? Do I admit and sometimes it is conflictious, and what this means, I don't know if it's in what I read, but he used this word like instructive. It must both instruct and initiate the seer. And this word instructive I found frustrating.
Yeah, it's difficult because I think it's him trying to, it's like any other experience. It's like trying to explain the taste of strawberries to somebody who's never had strawberries. It's kind of like, and he tends to be a little bit maybe hyperbolous, I guess, or he just goes really, really hard when he's going. So it's like if you don't quite like, often when he's describing the exercises that you should be doing and that sort of thing, sometimes he kind of makes it sound like, well, I must not be doing nearly enough, or it's like this is going to be intense if I have to do this kind of thing. I think even in this paper, he kind of refers to the mastery, the things you need to have in place in order to be doing proper astral work. And it makes it sound like you need to already have this stuff in place before you can do any astral work. But I think what he's actually getting at is that this is the kind of stuff that this is the way to hone your dagger. You want to, by doing this work, you are honing your dagger.
Yeah. And also thinking about the ways in which, like, instruct and educate the seer, and, like, not merely tried on a new dress, but encountered a different aspect of the self. Like, the way in which, like, after doing the sort of year of Enochian work, I just dropped artwork like a stone. It was like, I no longer care about being an actor, or you're saying, like, I should really join a club again. I should do the AA. I should get involved with a teaching order because I need to clean stuff up. Like, these are things that are profound that people have chosen to do as a result of their magic work, even though it wasn't anything about what the spirits actually said. It was sort of this attitude around the whole thing that made you think, I'm going to change my life. And then, like, even just the other day, I was doing some meditation where, and I saw a black bull being sacrificed. And there were all these fiends outside the tent, trying to steal some of the smoke of the sacrifice. But the fiends were all the gods of the tree of life, all the Canaanite pantheon, Baal and Jehovah and El and all these ones. And the smoke rose up, and when it got to the heavens, there was like the lion serpent there, and that this sacrifice was actually dedicated to, like, Abrasax, right? And I thought of Abrasax as being like a Gnostic true god, like not one of these impersonators, this demiurge, but like a Gnostic true god that the sacrifice was made to. And for the last 3 or 4 days, I've been walking around going, like, am I a Christian? Like, why is it like the Valentinian Jesus? Not that that's exactly who Abrasax is, but that he is a figure in Gnosticism and I think sort of like early Christian magic that made me, I've been like really like oh Christ. And then this thing about the vision of Maya, like, I never liked the idea that the Gnostics hated the world, but I'm lately been really feeling like it's just not real. Like, it just isn't even real. And so I reading this, I was like a little bit like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But talking to you today and reflecting on some of these experiences, I'm realizing that there are times in which the visions really do come away with something different. And I think that the idea is that what you're going for, it never seems like a pang of pain. It's just there always must be some slight pang of pain in any real first class astral vision, and it never feels painful. As a matter of fact, it feels underwhelming. Like a lot of times I'm getting these visions. I'm like, this really isn't like, I could just do a VR headset and like it'd be way more psychedelic. This just feels like a daydream. But then afterwards, you're like, whoa. It's not like waking up from a dream and it all goes away. It's like becomes more vivid upon reflection.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's kind of like you have to sort of find your own engagement with it to some extent as well, because I think that's the thing. It's so easy to get caught up in what Crowley's saying, where you're expecting, and that's the exact thing he's warning you against, right? It's like he's saying, like, be careful about how into my descriptions of things you get, and sort of find your own experience within it.
The biggest thing I think we haven't said yet is that you should actually be making an atlas.
Yeah.
So the notes for an Astral Atlas, this is how to obtain visions. But then once you obtain the visions, you have to build your atlas. And so you keep a diary, you write down everything you saw. You go back to 777 and make sure all the images are correct, like that you actually were in the country you're going to say you were in. Mm-hmm. If there's errors in the vision, do the experiment again so that all the symbols do line up. If you find there's one or two small things that just look different to you than are orthodox in the tradition, then maybe that your picture of the world is just a little bit different. But make sure you're right about that, and that all these visions can be coordinated along the Tree of Life model onto various sephira and paths and whatever else, and that what you're trying to do is construct, not just have one vision at a time, or ask the spirit to help you win the local pie contest, but that they should add up to a sort of picture of the universe, that you're slowly starting to draw kind of one impression at a time, and that one of the ways in which you avoid error is being rigorous about that, practicing lots, writing up your results, and then referencing Crowley says 777 and Liber D to make sure the symbols are appropriate.
Yeah, Liber D being Sephir Sephiroth.
Oh, I see.
And yes, so very important, because you will gradually learn the difference. Mm-hmm. You will get a sense of the terrain in the same way that you will learn how to do life in just mundane terms or whatever. I mean, it's easy to take for granted as an adult that, well, yeah, you get going around in life, but you were a baby once and you didn't, you had to learn all these things.
Crowley says there's a knack. He says to Dear Sister in Magic Without Tears, there's a definite knack to astral travel. And once you get it, you get it. And we should book some time to meet up in person so I can just show you. 2 or 3 experiments should be enough, and then you'll know how to do it. Mm-hmm. So in the absence of personal one-on-one tutelage from Crowley, I'm not sure where to begin, but yeah, you're right. It's an experiential activity.
Yeah, and I think one should not be afraid to start because one doesn't feel that they're living up to the standard that Crowley seems to be setting forth.
There's another note in, where is it in? Is it in Master of the Temple when he's writing to Jones, where he says that people often go wrong in their astral experiments because they think they need to lose all perception of their physical body. Mm-hmm. They really want the sense that they're out of body. And he says people self-sabotage a lot because they don't actually feel like they're flying through outer space the first time. Mm-hmm. I think it's partly because of something else in book 4 where he says when you have a firmly drawn asana, your body should be trusted to send you no signals for, the space of a whole hour or something. But it doesn't, at least in my experience, this sort of work doesn't feel the way lucid dreaming feels. It doesn't feel the way even watching a movie feels, where you just lose yourself totally in the narrative. I'm acutely aware of both the body and the daydream. Mm-hmm. And one distracts from the other sometimes, and I get lost in reverie. But if you get lost in reverie, then you are lost, and it's harder to remember, so you can't write up your record as clearly. Like, it's better to be, in some sense, conscious of what's happening. So.
Yeah, and even when you do go into reverie, maybe especially in the early stages when you're trying to figure out what it's supposed to feel like, allow yourself to explore that reverie, because you might discover something in it, in the sense that, like, you might start interacting with some of the beings that that reverie is bringing to mind, and then maybe that helps you to distinguish a reverie from an actual experience, or it might help you to trigger off some lucidity. Just experiment. Just get some familiarity.
Every YouTube video about astral travel starts with, this is how to lucid dream. Or, lay down and try to fall asleep, but don't let your mind wander while you're falling asleep, And it's like, it's just not the same thing. Like lucid dreaming is cool. And wilding is cool, but like real meditation work, Crowley says you shouldn't even do it when you feel tired because the danger is that you'll fall asleep. So as much as I would love to have like a really full-blown kind of fucked up out-of-body experience that's really vivid and makes me want to stab Newberg in his fucking face, I don't think that's always how it works, especially when you're starting out trying to learn.
No, it's true. I don't get, I think we probably have similar experiences when it comes to that. But basically, I'm suggesting that you don't go in with preconceptions of what you're going to end up coming out with, and it's not so much that basically just get in and start doing stuff. And if you start doing it on a regular basis, you'll find your way. And it's more important to not get too hung up on it, fulfilling your preconceptions from the outset, and learning, being open to learn.
Guys, just read the paper. It's no sentence is. For about the first 5 pages, there's no sentence in it that you're allowed to omit. It's very procedural, step by step. Even though you won't fully understand everything, take some time, think about it, because he's trying to do something. He's trying to communicate something that is philosophically interesting. And even though it won't teach you how to do astral travel, you'll get something out of it if you spend time with those first 3 or 4 pages and just read every sentence in the way we didn't have time to do today.
Yeah, and keep in mind that he also, if you're skeptical about the value of even bothering with any of this project, he's at least giving us the idea that the Book of the Law, for him, gives an example of proof of intelligences that are not incarnate in human bodies. And the reason that's relevant to us is it gives us encouragement to go out and try. There's something actually out there to try and communicate with.
I think that section is a kind of a redux of what we already discussed in our Equinox of the God episode, and in some of the Achad episodes we did a season or 2 ago.
Yeah, Liber 31.
So review those, but then also read this paper and see what he's referencing, because it becomes fun when you know what he's talking about, when you have a bird's eye view of the corpus, and it's not just like a footnote that you're never going to follow up, but you actually kind of know the anecdotes he's obliquely referencing.
Yeah,
it helps fill out your picture, and there's pleasure to be had in it.
Yeah, this is actually a great sort of nexus point for a lot of these different important aspects, many of which we have touched on in our deep dips. I can't remember if we already said that on mic or if we were off mic when we said that, but there it is. So
always record, never not record.
Lav mic comes with me always.
Great work, Darren. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. And 93. Thanks for listening. Look for Toronto Thelema on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Watch for events in the city. And join us again in the darkly splendid abodes. I have an Amazon delivery that I'm kind of curious if it's come or not.
What are you getting?
I have a textbook on pathology.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, because I'm doing, Liber HHH. There's the second part of it.
Gross,
A. So I have to. He suggests familiarizing yourself with textbooks of pathology to make yourself really grossed out. And
oh man, this is my least favorite part of studying. Anatomy I loved. Physiology I loved less, but the teacher was so great. And there's interesting things, like muscle physiology is super interesting, how sarcomeres work and stuff like this. But then pathology is just like, this is what it's called. These are the symptoms. These are the prognosis. Mm-hmm. And so not only is it gross, it's like boring. Like, women are more susceptible. It's just fucking brutal. But yeah, and then you have to imagine various ways in which it can all deteriorate, and it's absolutely, anyway, you're going to have fun, because that's the point of the exercise, right?
Yeah.
Is the kind of detachment from all of this horrible shit.
And also, yeah, it's envisioning your body, you dying by either some horrible accident or by disease or by, any number of means. And then your body being pretty much prepared for burial. And then after that, I'm still just working on that section, but it's like after that, then there's this whole invocation of revivification and all that sort of thing. But yeah, interesting stuff. It's kind of fun to actually be getting seriously into that for the the proper work. But
yeah, it's not one of the meditation exercises that's popularly prescribed, right? No matter where you go, everyone is always like, just attach to the breath.
Yeah.
Let your thoughts go. If thoughts come up, that's okay. Just let them wash over you like water. Allow your mind to return to the breath. No one's counting their breaks anymore. In my day, we used to count our breaks.
We designed little things that you could usually attach your thumb
Old
to
man
count your
yells
breaks.
at hippie.